It's great to be here today. Hope you can hear me okay. And we got lots of things to talk about today. And what I want to try to get you to do is to think about how different kinds of people think differently. When I was young, I thought everybody thought the same way I thought. I designed livestock equipment. Another mistake I made when I was in my 20s is I thought I could fix all the problems in the livestock industry with the right equipment. I can only fix half the problems. The other half of the problems you have to fix with the management. You have to have both the facilities and the management. And I thought everybody thought in pictures the way I did. And I found out that not everybody thinks the same way. And that sometimes when mistakes are made, it's not stupidity, it's different thinking. And I'm going to show how different kinds of minds need to work together. Now, when does normal variation in personality become an abnormality? One of the big problems we've got in today's schools is if you've got the littlest, tiniest problem and want to get some special education, you're going to have to get a diagnosis. You know, dyslexia, ADHD, maybe a touch of autism or Asperger's. And the problem is, especially on these milder ends of the spectrum, I'm seeing too many people sort of becoming their diagnosis. I don't like it when 9-year-olds walk up to me and tell me about their autism, instead of telling me that they like to train dogs or would like medieval history or some other thing. Now, the thing is, a lot of these traits, when does bipolar become just sort of geeky and creative? They're continuous traits. There's not a black and white dividing line between mild autism and geeks and nerds. It's basically all the same thing. Then there's more people with autism in technical careers. These diagnostic labels are not precise. It isn't like having an amputee and or you can't walk or something like that. That's something that's much more precise. It's a behavioral profile. In fact, over the years, the Psychiatric Association keeps changing the behavioral profile. They took out the Asperger's, which was basically geeky and socially awkward with no speech delay. Autism, you had to have speech delay. Now it's one big mucky spectrum. And you've got Silicon Valley put in with people that have a lot more handicaps. Now, the thing that I wonder is, in today's school system, what's going to happen to little Albert and little Stevie? Little Albert had no speech until age 3, likes to line up blocks, likes to play by himself. Sounds sort of like mild autism, doesn't it? How about little Stevie, a weird loner who brought snakes to his elementary school and turned them loose? That did not go over very well. And he was a filthy, dirty hippie that was so filthy that when he worked at Atari, they made him come in at night. He was teased in high school and bullied. And what saved him was the local neighborhood computer club. This is why I put so much emphasis on getting some of these kids that are kind of different involved in shared interests with peers. It could be programming computers. When I was in high school, it was Model Rocket Club, horses, and electronics. And those were places where I was not teased. That's where I got peers, through the shared interests. Now, another thing I believe in doing is what I call silo busting. And I've made a definite, deliberate point to sort of, not get too much into just the disability silo. Because when I go out to the Googleplex, there's mild autism all over the place. They avoid the labels. They go to Montessori schools and they get apprenticed in. And I talked to a human resources person at another tech company, and she goes, we know this, but we don't talk about it. Now, where a diagnosis can help some of these guys is on their relationships. That's where it can give a whole lot of insight. Now, you need to look at personality differences sort of like a music mixing board, and you can adjust, anxiety, slide it up and down. Maybe a brain can be made more social, or a brain can be made more thinking. You make a brain more thinking, you take out some social circuits. When does that become an abnormality? There's no black and white dividing line. This is one of the problems with things like dyslexia and autism. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, there was an article in Fortune magazine about dyslexic CEOs. And then the guy who was the head of JetBlue had ADHD. Great at getting things started, but not so good at operations. After that debacle they had at the Kennedy airport and all the planes trapped out there in the snow, that's where they need somebody like me to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, I am a visual thinker. I think completely in pictures. And I know some of you saw the HBO movie last night. It showed very clearly how I think in pictures. Now, when I was in my 20s, one of the mistakes I made is I thought everybody thought in pictures. That's not the case. And being a visual thinker really helped me in my work designing livestock handling facilities. And you might wonder why I make it curved, because as you make it curved, as they go on around the curve, they go back to where they're coming from. And if you'd like to see how a modern beef plant works, you can go on YouTube and watch Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin, and you'll see how a modern beef plant works. All right. Now, the thing is, when you're a really weird geek, you don't do that well in the interview process. You got to short circuit that. What you need to be doing is show off your work. I learned to sell my work and not myself. I can remember going to an ag engineering meeting in 1974-75. And I was a really weird geek back then, and I was so weird they didn't want to talk to me. But when I whipped out my drawings and I showed them my drawings, they go, oh, you did that? Make portfolios of work. It could be computer programming. It could be mathematics. It could be artwork. It could be some writing. You want something that when somebody opens that up, they just go, wow, this person really can do things. That's how I sold the jobs originally, showing people my portfolio. Now, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet circuit for visual thinking in my mind. And doing brain scans has been really kind of interesting, journey to the center of my mind. And I go, yeah, I found out that I got a pretty big circuit in my mind for visual thinking. This visual circuit's probably in the top 20% or so. This is a normal circuit. I'm going to show you later on a real abnormal circuit that may also have quite a bit to do with visual thinking. And that is the circuit for speak what you hear. Got a little tiny shrimpy circuit there. You see, in the brain, your gray matter's all around the outside. And then the whole middle part of the brain is like fiber optic cables that connect up different parts of the brain. And this is a fiber optic cable bundle for speak what you hear. And has a stupid Latin name, I don't know what it is. But when you start looking at some of the Latin names of the parts of the brain, the memory system is called the seahorse. I mean, really now? The motion center in the brain is called the almond. Yep, not very, very scientific. Now, this is a fiber bundle for speak what you see. This goes from the visual cortex up to the language areas of the brain. Okay, that shows a normal one. Now, that is mine right there. Lots of extra bushes. And those extra bushes go all over the brain. Well, now, this is on a continuum. If you were to go out and scan 100 people, how many extra bushes do you have to have for something to be abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. It isn't something like you're in a wheelchair and you can't walk. It's not clear cut. And I get worried about some of the geeks and nerds getting a handicap mentality, because I go over to the gifted conference and the same little geeks and nerds are there. And then I go to a seminar there, and they're talking about social problems in the gifted. Oh, I go, sounds like an autism meeting. And the thing that's bad about these silos is when I go out to the book tables, I go to a gifted conference book table. There might be 100 different books there. Autism book table, 100 different books, and there's almost no overlap in the books. That shows that people are staying in their silos. There should probably be 25% overlap in the books. And so these kids are going down different paths. And the problem we've got now with the autism diagnosis is we've got this huge mucky muck of a spectrum where kids need very different services on the high end than on the more severe end of the spectrum. Okay, now the price I paid for these extra bushes, which I think has something to do with having a language-based visual search engine. Give me keywords, pictures come up, just like in the movie, is I have less bandwidth for speak what I see. In other words, less fibers there. And when I was a little kid, I had trouble getting my speech out. And fortunately, I got into really good early intervention. I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. By 2.5 years old, I was in Miss Reynolds' speech school in Waltham, Massachusetts. She did a lot of the same kind of therapy they do today. Miss Reynolds invented the therapies they do today. You know, she was one of those older teachers that knew just sort of how hard to push. You got to kind of push these kids a little bit, otherwise they just don't develop. Couldn't get that language out. I think now I'm doing okay on that. Now, this scan right here, the blue part on that, that's basically full of water, full of cerebral spinal fluid. And you can see that I have an asymmetry. That kind of trashed out my math department. And I'm getting very worried about the educational fads we're in. Right now we're in an algebra fad. How would I get through college if I had to do algebra today? Well, back in '67, when I went to school, the fad at the time, and I thank the people that made the fads back in '67, it was finite math, probability, matrices, and statistics. And with 10 tons of tutoring, I was able to get through it. But the thing is, I'm going to show you why the world needs us visual thinkers. You know, we got to make sure our mathematical minds don't make some bad mistakes. Now, back in '68, up at Franklin Pierce College, I had access to the state-of-the-art IBM computer terminal that was tied into the University of New Hampshire mainframe. And I wanted to learn how to program the computer, but I just couldn't do it. You know, Malcolm Gladwell says if you have enough practice and enough access to services, you can do anything. I don't think that's true. I think a better way to look at it is when you get on extreme ability, or maybe an extreme more disability, innate matters more. Let's say this is the range, but in the middle here, you got a music mixing board here in the middle, that's your brain plasticity. But you get on these far ends, like somebody's got extreme athletic ability. Now, yes, I agree with the practice. You've got to develop ability. I was talking to some people about a guy who took some welding classes, and he thought he could just go out and get a job. No, you got to practice welding. You know, you're not going to learn that overnight. This is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. You know, for me to think about something, I think about it in very, very specific pictures. Algebra is totally impossible. Kids that can't do algebra, let's jump them to geometry and trig. Well, I couldn't get past algebra, so I never got to do geometry. That was a mistake. Then you have the mathematical mind. He thinks in patterns. And these guys don't think in pictures quite the same way. See, in your brain, you have circuits for what is something. That's me in the extreme. Then you also have circuits in the brain for where are you located in space? Where is something? And these kids often have trouble with reading. And there's too much emphasis in special ed on the deficit and not enough emphasis on building up the area of strength. Where would Einstein go today? Would he be in the basement addicted to video games today? I'm seeing too many young people where that's happening. They're not going into great jobs in the video game industry. They're playing video games. Now, let's look at the kind of jobs for the different kinds of minds. Okay, my kind of mind, photography, a whole field called industrial design. I'd be very good at something like auto mechanics, diesel mechanics, fixing problems with electric wires. And I can tell you, those jobs are not going to get outsourced to China. There's a lot of jobs that take the 2-year community college degree. And let me tell you, stupid people can't fix things like substations. Well, you like electricity, don't you? Well, those things are going to have to work. Pattern thinkers, they're your programmers, your engineers, your mathematicians. And then another kind of mind is very good with words. And I think we got to start thinking about college majors and stuff like, what are you going to do when you finally get out? I did a lot of job-related things. When I was 13, my mother got me a sewing job. When I was 15, I was cleaning 8 horse stalls every day and basically running a horse barn. I also went out to my aunt's ranch, and I had to wait on a few tables there too. You know, seeing too many kids not learning sort of the discipline of having a job. And then I had an internship at a research lab. It was actually the Worcester Foundation for Experimental Biology, where I had to rent my own house, live with another person. You see, you got to take these kids that are kind of different and you got to stretch them. Surprises cause panic. You can't just chuck them in the deep end of the pool. But if you don't stretch them, then they don't develop. And people can be mixtures. And then there's some people with dyslexia where they're a great auditory learner. They learn everything through their ears. Now, you might think I'm telling you a pile of rubbish about the different kinds of minds. Well, here is scientific evidence on this slide. You know, Marie Kozanoff, Harvard and the Angelica Mazard PET scan studies. And these references are in my autistic brain book. And I think they're going to have those for sale afterwards. I will be out there. And these things really are real. And when these kids get labels, they tend to be more extreme on this stuff. Okay, just want to show you there's two ways to do the math. The verbal way and the visual spatial way. Well, right now in the schools, they're saying kids have got to show their work. Well, some of these kids can just do it in their head. There's no work to show. And they're just going to go nowhere if you force them. I think a lot of people have a hard time kind of getting the idea through their head that people do think differently. Now, if the kid's able to do it in his head, I'm going to take some precautions against cheating. I've got to make sure they don't have some electronic thing in their pocket that they're cheating with. So I take all that stuff away, and once I rule that out, then okay, let them do it in his head. I think in education, we got to get a lot more into outcomes. What's the outcome of education? Get and keep good jobs, stay out of trouble with the law, be a contributing member of society. That's what education is really all about. And I developed a system for measuring animal welfare at meatpacking plants. It's an outcome-based system. I don't tell you how to build stuff, but you're only allowed 3 cattle bellowing their heads off in the plant. More than 3 cattle out of 100 bellow their heads off, then you're going to fail the McDonald's audit. It's just that simple. It's outcome-based. Cattle bellowing their heads off, it's because you're doing something nasty to them. All right, I want to give you a glimpse into the mathematic mind. This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cutting, no tape. What you see in the background, that is the folding pattern. Pretty cool, isn't it? That's certainly not my mind. And there are some great little origami stars that some kids gave to me. Well, little mathematicians. And here's another one of my drawings. I always like to show my drawings off. And kids need to be putting together a good portfolio. I'll have someone had come up to me in an autism meeting and they said they're trying to get into graphic design or something like that. I said, show me your portfolio. Well, you need to have your portfolio on your phone. You need to have it with you. Because one thing I figured out very early on is you never know who might come around you can show it to. Who can open the door? I talked to a fascinating lady last night on the plane, and that makes works in the medical device field. They make the corneal implants for so people can see when they get cataracts. She was telling about all the developing countries they were going to and stuff. Well, you sit next to somebody like that and you have your portfolio, you might not end up getting a job. And when you're kind of a weird geek, you need to have your work there to show off. Now, this is a picture done by Jessie Park. She's got autism, and I'd say more at the moderate level. Now, one of the things that had to be done with Jessie is she had to learn how to do art that other people want. And you know what her favorite thing used to be? Electric blanket control pictures. Don't think most people want that. So she had to learn to do pictures that people would actually want and buy. See, people on the spectrum tend to get fixated on their favorite things. If the kid likes trains, the things that move, trains and planes tend to be favorite things. My favorite things were kites and model airplanes. Okay, let's do math. Let's calculate how long it takes a plane to fly to Chicago at a certain speed. Let's read about the history of aviation. Let's broaden it out. Use the motivation of that fixation to motivate doing other subjects. And here's a beautiful picture that Grant Monnier made. His mother helped him develop his skills. And he was showing his art in just autism meetings. And I said, this art is good enough to show professionally and sell professionally. And she went to a professional art show. I think she went to a show in Dallas or Houston and did really well. Now, Grant's somebody that's probably going to have to live in a supervised living situation, just like Jessie does. But they're selling art on the regular commercial market. All right, now I'm going to show you why all you algebra fanatics out there need to have my kind of mind on the design team. All right, we got a real mess there that you don't want to get near. That is the remains of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And when I found out why these reactors melted down, I go, how could you make this mistake? And the thing is, the mathematician mind doesn't see things the way I do. I can't design a nuclear reactor. All I know about a nuclear reactor is if the emergency cooling pumps don't work, I'm in so much trouble it's not funny. It's not a very good idea when you live next to the sea to put those emergency cooling pumps and all the electric boards and all your emergency generators in a non-waterproof basement. I'm not kidding. That is why I think there's 3 reactors melted down and had total loss of containment. This was an absolute mess. The other problem is the Japanese operators never asked for help either. That also added to the mess. But the kind of job that I'd be capable of doing is drawing the concrete workup for this plant, doing your side elevations, and I would have been going, oh, ye gads, I'm below grade here. I better buy some waterproof doors. I would have been on the phone to shipbuilding companies, get me all the catalogs for waterproof doors. And if they had had that, and maybe some sump pumps, you live around here, you know what sump pumps are for basements. You know, like a little bit bigger version of this would not have happened. You see, this is why we need the different kinds of minds. You know, you had airbags out there killing babies. Well, they followed a spec blindly that had to hold in an adult male with no seatbelt. Well, okay, guy, you better do up your seatbelt because it's impossible to design an airbag that's not going to kill children otherwise. Okay? Now, Steve Jobs, when he was like messing around, he got fascinated with calligraphy. Now, Steve Jobs was an engineer. Steve Jobs was not an engineer. See, I tend to be a little dyslexic and reverse things. He was not an engineer. He was an artist. We need the art mind. So every time you use your smartphone, an artist made that interface. Then the engineers had to make the inside of the phone work. See, this is an example of the different kinds of minds working together. We need to have the different kinds of minds. Now, some people have said the humanities are kind of worthless, and you know, when I went to college up at Franklin Pierce College, and I was a psychology major. Why do I have to take this stupid world literature course? Well, it turned out being my favorite class. No, and I thought this was a really good statement made by David Baresh, 2013, in the Chronicle of Higher Education. The connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanity programs such as calligraphy should not be ignored. We do need all the different kinds of minds. And there are some states, I'm not going to say which state, but 2 years ago I went and did a big convocation and found out that in this state they wanted to charge more tuition at the state university for humanities than for other engineering or some kind of thing like that, or business. Now, on the other hand, I think some humanities majors are getting way too narrow. Okay, humanities major, you better be really good at writing. You better be really good at public speaking so that when you get out, you've got some skills that you can do outside your major. Now, there's some evidence that teaching the classic literature, not the kind of rubbish you can buy at the airport, but the real classic literature, actually can help people have better social skills. This is an article published in Science. You know, Science, that's a real premier journal. Now, in my work with livestock, I noticed that cattle were afraid of a whole lot of little things that people don't notice, like a chain hanging down, people walking by, a car parked next to a facility, a reflection, it's too dark. Visual detail. Animals are sensory-based learners. They're not word-based learners. They are into visual detail, smell detail. Think how much the dog learns when he checks out the local fire hydrant. That's like going out to the coffee shop. He knows who's a friend or foe. You know, did the big bad bully go by here? Are there any girlfriends around here? There's a lot of information on that hydrant. Now, I talked about sensory. How many people here, I want to see if you're really good at visual things, notice that that animal is looking at the sunbeam? Oh, we're not doing very good on observation here. You see, this is where I found if you do things like remove that sunbeam, then the cattle are going to go through the facility a whole lot better. That is visual detail. Okay, look at how the horse and the zebra have an ear on each other, and the other ear is looking at me. You see, this is detail. You see, when you think in words, you tend to overgeneralize. People that think totally in words tend to abstractify things too much. No, we need to be getting a lot more into the details. Now, this shows infants going into a meatpacking plant. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you any gross meat pictures. You can go look at Beef Plant Video Tour with Temple Grandin. And you'll see how the meatpacking plant works. But I always get asked, do the cattle know they're going to get slaughtered? Well, I found they behave the same way at the meatpacking plant as they behave going in the veterinary chute. Yes, there's some stress, but the level of stress is about the same in both places. It can range from high to low, depending on how well they do their handling. Well, they don't like going into the dark, and they've got white translucent panels there. That's really good. But what a lot of people don't notice is you got 3 people standing right where they should not be standing. And when I show this slide to my students, only about half of them see the people standing there. You see, sometimes the most obvious is the least obvious. It's just like putting that emergency equipment in that non-waterproof basement. That is something that was so obvious to me. Now, in human beings, there's evidence that language covers up sensory-based thinking, because if there's a certain type of Alzheimer's, that as the language parts of the brain are destroyed, art talent comes out. And when Van Gogh was painting Starry Night, I don't think he realized he was putting mathematics in it. And when I read about this, I thought, oh man, that's really, really cool. Okay, this is an important slide. I'm a bottom-up thinker. Concepts are learned with specific examples. We need a lot more of this. Everything is learned by specific examples. You take the puzzle pieces and put them together. We need a lot more bottom-up thinking in Washington, D.C. One of my big concerns right now is we got too many young people coming out with a degree in something like public administration. I hope you don't have that degree here, because I'm going to bash it right now. I'm going, you mean I can actually get a degree in bureaucracy? And about 15 years ago, somebody put a sign on my office, that had been through the fax machine. You probably don't even know what a fax machine is. But this had gone around every office in the country. And it said, administratium, the heaviest element known to man. It has an atomic weight of some astronomical amount. And the thing is, it reacts with nothing because it's inert. They got to make sure we don't get turned into administratium. And I don't know where the sign came from, and I haven't looked up administratium on the internet. I probably need to do that. And let's look at specific examples in the disability community that have worked. Look up Walgreens, the drug company, warehouse program. And they have people with all different disabilities working in the warehouse. Look at things like wheelchair basketball in the last Summer Olympics. That's people doing things. Let's get into much more emphasis. I was just down at Lubbock, Texas, at the Burkhart Center in Lubbock, Texas, and I found out about a Down syndrome girl that has been trained to set up surgical instruments for heart surgery, and they love her. They say she's absolutely precise, she's really nice, and she doesn't gossip. And the hospital absolutely loves her. Okay, these are the sort of success stories that we want to kind of duplicate this. You see, this is not thinking in abstractions. I'm thinking more in specific examples. All right, so if I got to teach a kid a concept like going up, I've got to use lots of different specific examples. Up the hill, I lift up the cup. The plane flew up in the air. I put a box up on the shelf. My thinking is associative, not linear. See, if you think in words, you tend to be very linear. And you lots of times have a hard time, you think of the whole thing about thinking outside the box. People tend to get too much in their silos. I want to bust out of silos. So I make a point in my speaking engagements to take a variety of different things. I'll do gifted conferences, I'll do cattle stuff. I've been to Google, I've been to Pixar, I've been to Disney Imagineering. Love to go do tech stuff. Those are the happy people on the mild end of the autism spectrum. Do something, doing the movie was really interesting. I know some directors and stuff in Hollywood that I know are on the spectrum, but I do not talk about the live ones. Only the dead ones will I diagnose. I'll diagnose them after they die, not before. I can think of some heads of some big tech companies that I know are on the spectrum. Look up their interviews online, Now, when I look at the United Airlines Concourse B, I can start going into my mind either into a glass structure category, just like Google for Images. Who do you think made Google for Images? Or an airport category. There are no generalized pictures. If I say, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I see specific ones. I was shocked to find out like 25 years ago that someone goes, oh, pointy thing? Get a very, very abstract church steeple. So glass structures, I got the Biosphere in Arizona, the Crystal Palace. I've got our greenhouse at Colorado State. Now I'm thinking about our building that's under construction. Now another picture's coming into my mind of when they were working on our behavioral science building. The construction company took up about 20 of our super valuable parking spaces with the trailers. You see how my mind is, you see how I got to that. It's not random. It is associative. Or I can get into an airport category. Denver International Airport. Let's think about things like big amounts of money. I think it's stupid to talk about big amounts of money and like how many dollar bills it would take to go to the moon. That's like stupid. Nobody can relate to that. When we talk about big amounts of money, let's talk about it in something we can understand. When they did the stimulus money in 2008, it was equal to 2 Denver airports for every state. Buys the land, the runways, everything except things that drive and things that fly. Everything else included. Security, air traffic control, all the runways, all the land, power, water, terminal building, all the jet bridges, all of the airport infrastructure. Where did that money go? 2 airports for every state. You see, let's take these big amounts of money in budgets and convert it to something I can actually relate to. So, okay, I can get in the airport category. Dallas-Fort Worth, Minneapolis, Atlanta. Man, what a joke. I was down there, 2.5 inches of snow. What a joke. Oh, the governor, I was in a super nice guest house. I'm really glad I was there, not stuck in that mess. The governor was saying, truckers stay out of Georgia. I mean, it was ridiculous. And then you got LaGuardia. Some people call that airport LaGarbage. But I picked out this picture to be my LaGuardia picture because this building just kind of fascinates me. It might be really fun old airport antique junk in there. It'd be fun to explore. Now, when I asked a physicist about church steeples, trippy man, he didn't get pictures or words. He got motion of people swaying and singing and praying and standing and kneeling. Trippy man. That's not my mind. I really like these different kinds of minds because I like to think about how the different kinds of minds can work together and complement each other when you realize that different people have different kinds of skills. I had a student one time that was good at everything I was bad at. She could run all the statistics programs, super meticulous on collecting data. But when it came to creative ways of sorting data and analyzing it, that's where I had to step in. Now, cattle are very specific. You need to teach cattle that a man on a horse is good, and you teach them that a man walking on the ground is good. See, it's a different picture. You got to train them to both. Working with some of these kids, I've got especially some of the more severe ones. Things are very specific. Doesn't generalize. See, when you're sensory-based, it doesn't generalize the same way. Okay, we're trying to figure out a problem. Do we have something wrong with a piece of equipment or something wrong with the design of the equipment? Do we have a behavior problem with a kid? Is it biology, like maybe it's sensory oversensitivity, or is it psychology? Top-down thinkers tend to overgeneralize and go, what are we going to do about autism? That's way too generalized. People ask me these top-down questions all the time. My kid has behavior trouble in the classroom. I wouldn't even begin to answer that. How could I answer that? I don't know the age. I don't know what he did. I don't know anything about it. That's overgeneralization. Too much top-down thinking gets you in trouble. And programmers have a term called dogfooding. And what dogfooding is when you got to use the things that you actually make. Use the programs you actually make. Is it going to work? Okay, healthcare is a big issue. Well, what does this program do to Susie that lives over here in this trailer park? What about this guy over here that works for the tech company out on 128? What about this college professor? Let's start looking at it in a more specific way. Now, it's okay to be eccentric. I visited the Jet Propulsion Lab, really, really cool place. and the guy with the long hair is my age. He was a theater major originally. Now he's the navigator for the Mars rover. So people can get into careers with different paths. What this brings up is, if you don't show kids interesting stuff, they don't get interested in it. How did I get interested in cattle? Because my mother got remarried when I was 14, and that brought the ranch into the family. And then my mother wanted me to go out to the ranch in Arizona. And I was afraid to go. She wouldn't let me not go. She gave me a choice, 1 week or all summer. I give these kids choices. And one place my mother drew a line in the sand, and my high school drew a line in the sand, is no being a recluse in the room. I'm seeing too many of these kids turning into video game recluses, and they're not going anywhere. People think I'm an old fogey, but if they were getting great jobs in the video game industry, I would feel a little differently about it. Now, the thing is, I found that looking at things was more interesting than looking at people. Well, you can need some people interested in things. Okay, when the substation for the electric power floods in New York, you want somebody very interested in things to fix that for you. Yes, you go by those substation things where all the wires come into those big transformer things. You better love those places, because you won't have any power if those things don't work. It's that simple, unless you got some solar panels. Okay, one of the things we can do to help kids succeed, you got to stretch them just outside their comfort zone, but no sudden surprises. Another thing, these kids that are kind of different, mentors. I had a fabulous science teacher. There's a lot of retirees that are getting bored. Maybe get some old lawnmowers and have these 12-year-old boys fix engines. Because if they don't get exposed to that, they don't find out that they're going to like it. Also, kids have got to learn work skills. This needs to start around 12 or 13, and I wish the Boston Globe still had paper routes, because I'd put all these kids on it. Let's figure out substitutes. How about walking dogs? How about working in the farmer's market? I'm going to call these paper route substitutes. They've got to learn that discipline of having a job. That needs to start around 13 years old. I'm seeing too many kids graduating from college to get a degree in something like philosophy, never done a single work skill. That's totally, totally bad. Also, kids are not doing free play anymore. A lot of kids, even normal kids, don't know how to do free play. I talked to this fascinating lady that has an organic farm, and she has 40, 11, and 10-year-olds come out to her place to camp. And this is the first time that they could do free play, explore a 10-acre walnut orchard. And for the first 2 days, they don't know what to do. And they're moping around because they take all the video games and phones away. And then these kids find out that free play is fun. But it also teaches you negotiation, getting along with other people. I think one of the worst things the schools have done is taking out the hands-on classes. Absolutely terrible. Totally a worst thing. These classes like cooking, sewing, art, music, woodworking, welding, drafting, they also teach practical problem-solving skills. The thing is, in the real world, things can't be perfect. We have a huge shortage. Auto mechanics, people to fix the electrical wires when they break, a lot of these skilled trades. Huge shortage. Well, this is the kind of classes that saved me when I was in high school. Horseback riding, building things. And when I was in high school, I did a really nice job of making our Skeeto house pretty. Didn't do much studying, but boy, I sure was learning the work skills. Well, I think I'm going to be getting behind here. I think hopefully I've got a rush now. I think we need to be limiting the screen time. The other thing is, okay, let's say the kids hung up on Minecraft. Let's try to get that into other things. First of all, let's have them do Minecraft assignments where you've got to build something that's an assigned task. Things like robotics clubs. You've got to learn how to do assigned tasks. One mom made wooden blocks and had the kids paint them, and they did Minecraft in the driveway. You see, I want to get the electronic world tied back to the physical things. Some kids do just great with showing animals. Build on the area of strength. I cannot emphasize that enough. My ability in art was always encouraged, but I was encouraged to do lots of different things. You want to broaden those fixations. And there's great online resources. Code Academy, Udacity, free programming classes, Wolfram Mathematica. And when I was in high school, I saw a science movie, and I got all turned on about optical illusion rooms. See, this brings up the whole thing. If you got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. And here's one of my drawings in SketchUp, free drawing program. Oh, there's great stuff online. But you need to have mentors to guide it. The other thing is, kids have got to learn to do assigned tasks, because when you grow up and you have a job, you don't get to play. You've got to sometimes do some grunt work and some drudgery and do assigned tasks. And here's a really neat thing, 3D printers. Really cool thing, because it connects the computer world to the real world. And I thought it was interesting what MakerBot put on their website. Warning, it requires patience. A lot of kids today don't have patience, know-how, and a sense of adventure. Because if you don't do it right, it prints you a pile of plastic goo. You're going to have some patience. And then you can make cool things like that. Look at cool things through microscopes. There's all kinds of great stuff. All right, teaching reading. Interesting things. The hand is connected to the brain, and the eye is connected to the brain in a way that maybe the keyboard's not. And having kids actually hand print. Also, when people read to children, let's turn off all the gizmos, the go to videos and things, because the kids look at those links and then they don't pay attention to the story. And this is where a paper book worked better than an electronic one. Now, they did not test plain electronic with no gizmos. I think that would work fine. But if they're looking at that link on there that they know goes to video, then they're not paying attention to the story. See, and these are journal articles. We're really into evidence-based today, and I'm making sure I'm giving you the evidence-based. And then out at Pixar, they found that they had to get them off the computers, sometimes get back to the hand drawings, because you got to build things. The thing I like about the 3D printers is when you print something out, you can actually touch it. And a lot of the people put all their little printouts next to the computer mouse so they can touch them. You got to touch and see and feel to really see things right. And when the meat industry went from the hand drawings to the computer, they started noticing a lot of strange mistakes on drawings. They didn't know where the center of the circle was because they'd never built anything. They'd never drawn anything by hand. Mentors. Already talked about, what we need to be doing on that. Well, we already talked about visualizing big sums of money. Kids have got to get some experiences in doing things. Okay, I'll just give you one example of experience. Okay, the bookstore hadn't originally planned to sell my books out there. I said, well, just do it. Get them to do it. Well, I can tell you one thing being in the construction industry taught me, teaches you how to get stuff done. Simple. All right, you want to sell your work rather than yourself. So create a portfolio so you can show that to a prospective employer. I was talking to a guy who was good at welding, and I said, why don't you make a really nice presentation briefcase with some welded little pieces of metal, pictures of jobs, you open that up, and people go, wow. Also, at work, I need to have specific goals, even now. When I worked on a project on some animal welfare guidelines, we had a big meeting with 20 different people. I said, okay, now give me some homework on some specific parts of this document that I'm supposed to write. And freelance work is often good. Avoids a lot of political problems. Now, the thing is, Weird Geek, you demonstrate how to do the job. Well, when I was 8 years old, I had to be a little party hostess. That was good social training, sort of like coaching in a play. I'm going to end up talking just briefly about some of the sensory problems that people are different that have. Maybe they can't tolerate too much noise, or they can't tolerate scratchy clothes, or they can't tolerate fluorescent lights that flicker, the old-fashioned 60-cycle fluorescent lights. Now, do I go in there and tell the boss I got autism and all that stuff? No, I might just tell them that fluorescent lights give me a headache, or I need a quiet place to work. And in the autistic brain, we got a lot more information on sensory issues. Now, I'm not supposed to be doing any questions in the audience, but I'm a silo buster. I'm going to take a few questions off the audience. We're going to be about 5 minutes late. All right, somebody here in the front where I can hear you. Okay, come on, people. All right. I'm going to pick somebody. Okay, green sweater right there. Okay, I guess, all right, right here. All right, right, now the question came up. Let me just repeat this. Well, if you ask for directions, the negative stigma come up. That's getting into a lot of PC talk. You know, the way I dealt with that is I just, okay, now I want to find out what the outcome of the work is. Okay, a good boss, okay, you don't just say to somebody, well, develop new software. You give them an assignment to do some specific thing. And you know, you just, you know, when I was doing advertising and things like this, I said, okay, what am I supposed to be advertising? Tell me what the outcome is, when the deadline is. You know, you don't have to go into all this minutia about, you know, you've got autism or something like that. I just say things like, I do better with written instructions. Give me a chance to write down exactly what you want me to do. I do not remember sequence well. I don't tell them I don't remember sequence well. I just say, look, I just like to write it down. Okay, we're designing this project for this meatpacking plant. It has to be this budget, this many people. Here's the site restrictions. No, you cannot rip out the railroad track. You know, it's so that I know what the parameters are. Or I can say I need a quiet place to work. If you stick me in an open cube, I'm not going to do very good work because if everybody's walking by me to go to the bathroom, that drives me crazy. You know, that's the way you do it. You know, the thing is, I learned to sell my work. People don't care how weird you are if your stuff's good enough. And there's a scene in the movie where my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, you stink, use it. At the time, I was furious. Now I thank that boss. You know, it's not a matter of just accepting you how you are. Sometimes you got to kind of come halfway on things. Being eccentric's fine. Being a slob is not okay. Okay, another question. Okay, right there. Make it quick. Oh, I can't hear you. How many jobs I've had? I worked freelance. So I basically worked for every single one of the major meat companies. And my first job I ever had, I was livestock editor for the Farmer Ranchman magazine. And I started up doing it voluntary. And then we got a new boss who thought I was really weird, and he wanted to get rid of me. And the nice graphics lady, Susan, said to me, well, this new boss, Jim, thinks you're really weird, wants to get rid of you. Let's get a scrapbook together of all your articles. So I got a scrapbook together of all my articles, and when I showed it to Jim, I got a raise. You know, I built up my business one little job at a time. You know, make a good portfolio, but don't put too much rubbish in your portfolio. When you show that to an employer, you want like 5 really good things in it. And the other thing is, you got to show the right stuff. I talked to one lady, she did weird science fiction art, and she had a weird web page. And when she wanted to do some commercial art for car dealerships and banks, they didn't go over very well. And I said to her, why don't you just buy another domain name? They're only $35 a year. Start another web page with a totally different domain name for what's going to be your regular commercial art. And so those clients don't even get into the weird stuff. Okay, right there. How what? I can't hear. How did autism positively affect my life? Well, I'm an extreme visual thinker, which makes me good at certain things other people are not good at. You see, that's almost too vague of a thing. You see, my sense of identity is hung up in being a college professor and what I do. I am what I do. You see, and I worked in construction for 20 years, and boy, I can tell you, there were lots of dyslexics. I know people that are dyslexic. They build these big, complicated feed mills. I know some metal fabricators that I know are on the autism spectrum, and they were saved by the welding class. I think a little more emphasis on what you can do. Let's go back to the people playing wheelchair basketball. Yeah, I'm a basketball player. I'm an athlete. And that's a really fun game to watch. Okay, one super quick one right there, and then we'll go. I'm getting a big hint here.
Let's do this.
All right.
Because to classes, so if you're a student and you need to leave, why don't we go ahead and dismiss you now? But if you'd like to stay and we have a little more question and answer,
I'll be happy
is that
to do
okay?
that.
Great.
I'll be happy to do that.